breaking down everyday workplace issues and diagnosing the hidden sickness, not just the obvious symptom. Our hosts, James and Kobe.
Did we lose a patient?
No, that's just my lunch.
Hey, thanks for joining us. I'm Kobe, he's James, and let's get started with a question. What can be done to improve employee performance?
Really, to improve employee performance, we really need to understand how performance management is being used in our workplace. Is your performance management system designed to punish poor performance, essentially using it as a control tool, or are you trying to encourage high performance, turning it into a productivity tool? Control-based performance management systems tend to focus on the consequences of poor performance, and they rely heavily on things like performance improvement plans, where underperformance is called out, and PIPs are used really as setting the stage for termination. These forms of performance management systems are kind of a hallmark of poor or even toxic workplace cultures, where productivity-based performance management systems, on the other hand, are really focused on setting and managing expectations. They set the guardrails for what people can do within the limits of within the authority of their role, and they provide regular check-ins and support to help people achieve the expectations that we set. A lot of how your performance management system is designed kind of depends on how HR is viewed within your company.
Yeah, no, that's a really important point to even just challenge or rethink how performance management and employee performance is viewed in the workplace. Because again, when we talk to businesses and they talk about employee performance, it's really they're talking about mitigating risk, mitigating problems, resolving employee issues through kind of this almost like happy sunshine language of we're not trying to discipline you, we're trying to improve your performance. And it's something that is, when that happens, everyone knows what's going on. You're not fooling anybody. You're putting lipstick on a pig in a sense, right? And to me, I'm always like, that's not a good sign when we're doing like when we see it doing initial assessments, because it's like you're really just trying to use positive language to address something that you see as very negative, and then it kind of means you don't really have a plan on how we're going to actually improve employee performance, how we're actually going to manage employees' performance to have them do better, reach higher, and and excel. We're just using this language of performance management and employee performance as a synonym for discipline.
Yeah, and typically the tools are often the same. Like, there's nothing inherently bad about a performance improvement plan,
You're right.
right? We've identified that somebody is not meeting the expectations that we have set out in advance, and we have provided support to them. They're still failing to meet those expectations. So we are going to put a performance improvement plan in place that says, here's the expectations, here's what we are going to do to support you, here's where you need to be by X period of time. And if you still continue to not meet those expectations, then there will be some sort of consequence. Totally reasonable approach. It's in how the tools are used and how they're thought of within the organization that really makes the difference between control-based and productivity-based. I have evaluated a lot of performance management systems for clients. And many times when like you said, when we're doing the initial assessments or the early stages of engagements with clients, we're looking at what they're doing and how they approach these things. And many times, the only performance management tool they use is a PIP.
Mm-hmm.
And if the only way that you monitor and manage performance is through corrective action, then you're not trying to support people to improve their performance. You are disciplining people for failing to meet your expectations. Mm-hmm. Now, it's not every time, but the vast majority of time that this happens, expectations are not clearly set in advance,
Mhm.
and there's not a system in place for supporting people doing the regular check-ins, whether that's quarterly evaluations to see are we on track with to meet our goals, and what can we do to support you to continue to improve that. It's a once a year sit down, or when something significant happens, we slap them with a you messed up, here's a pip, if you don't fix it in 6 months, we're going to fire you mentality.
And I think maybe it is. I mean, this is the heart of it. Is I feel sometimes that when workplaces try to use, again, the performance management as a substitute or a softening of discipline, it almost seems passive aggressive. And maybe
Mhm.
that's part of what is that I dislike. It seems a bit deceitful. And again, I know, no employee wants to be brought in for a disciplinary meeting, but bringing them in for a performance improvement meeting that where they're being disciplined doesn't negate
Changing the
the
name and not
severity.
changing the outcome doesn't mean anything. You're still trying to discipline them. You're just being a little less forward and upfront about what you're doing.
Yeah. Now, what you said before too about how we, again, how the employee performance programs are used, kind of based a bit on kind of the expectations of the organization, and that makes me think that we should go back and talk about something we did in an episode last season, where we talked about kind of what does HR mean in your organization. We talked about in that conversation, talking about we call it the four faces of HR. So basically, that HR, the H and the R, kind of have a different meaning, or in different organizations based on kind of the mindset and the view of both employee relations and HR departments, and I guess performance management would fall into that. So I think it might not hurt for us to kind of talk about that again, and then kind of talk about what does performance management look like in those different environments, in hopes that the person listening to this, you'll be able to kind of maybe connect with, yeah, that kind of sounds a bit like my workplace, or yeah, that is maybe some of the mindset issues that we're struggling with. And hopefully again, make some kind of, again, clear understanding for how can employee performance be improved based on the type of HR and kind of the governing philosophies around employee relations that kind of are in these workplaces.
So the first one that I think is important to talk about is if HR in your workplace really stands for holding red tape, where the intent and really the primary activity of your HR department really is just compliance and making sure that processes are being followed and there's no real strategic intent behind it, then honestly, you're probably not using it as a productivity tool. And honestly, you're probably not using it as a control tool either. Very likely it's just a box that needs to be checked, right? Once a year, we have a performance conversation so that we can tick the box that says we have, on an annual basis, done a performance management criteria. We've met our obligations. On to the next thing.
Yeah, no, I think that's bang on. You're right, because it's not even that its performance management is used for anything other than it's a process we have to go through to say that we've gone through it. And I'm sure anybody hearing this conversation can remember sitting in a performance management or a yearly performance review meeting, and you're like, why am I here? I'm like, sure, I'll just do what I did this year. I'll just do it better next year. Or sure, and you and sometimes even your supervisor, you're both like, why are we even doing this? It's a exercise it's administrative exercise. It really has no value on my daily work.
And
So,
we've seen this firsthand in
that's true.
companies,
Yeah.
right?
Hmm.
We've
Yep.
seen it where staff sit around a table and do their performance management process together, and they
Yeah.
recycle the same 3 to 5 goals. This year, I'm going to choose this goal because it sounds good, right?
Yeah. Oh yeah, I used that one last year.
So
Maybe
I'll
I'll
use
yeah.
this, right? Like it becomes a routine activity that has no meaning and no value beyond somebody at head office being able to say it was done. I don't care about anything other than check the box. It's done. Let's move on.
Right. So the answer to our question, what can be done to improve employee performance, in the holding red tape department
A
is,
lot.
yeah, is really anything.
Yeah.
Um, not making it a ridiculous activity for all people involved, showing the managers how they can actually make this into a meaningful kind of like, part of the work. Again, start small. Start, because you're gonna have to re-educate everybody involved that this isn't an exercise in futility, or this isn't just some type of lip service process that you're doing.
I feel for somebody in this situation who wants to make change, because if the way leadership in your company views HR is merely as holding red tape, then you may not be empowered to make any changes,
Yeah.
which is a very frustrating place to be. And you've probably already identified that there's a whole number of ways that it can be done better. But yes, Kobe, you're right that start small within the authority that you have.
Well, and I said this in meetings with businesses, and I've said this on the podcast before, but if employee performance, if performance management doesn't matter, then employee performance doesn't matter.
Mhm.
And I mean, if you're in a situation where you're, feeling, that, senior leadership or those above you are limiting your ability to be empowered to do anything about this because it's just an administrative process, then that's the mentality I suggest you find a way to bring to them. If this is something that is not important, then we're saying and we're living and we're walking the walk that employee performance doesn't matter. And kind of put that on them to say, we can do better. I've got a plan to do better. But I need to be supported in my performance to do my job better so that I can help them do their jobs better.
Yeah.
But make it very clear, if the whole process of managing performance doesn't matter, then performance doesn't matter. All right. So the next next phase of HR is when HR stands for the highly reactive department. And this is about when the daily interactions of the HR departments is really just putting out fires. Sometimes this looks like a kind of HR roles where it's just about trying to fill vacancies. And the majority of all the HR time is spent just trying to put bums in seats because we can't get enough staff. Or it's about trying to run around and put out kind of interpersonal fires, and every day is just about reacting to what happened this morning or yesterday or whatever. And it's really just kind of running from fire to fire and never feeling like you're ever getting ahead. And this is both depressing and depressingly common.
Yeah. Well, I think in the reactive mindset, performance management becomes a control tool, right? Because you're trying to limit the number of fires that happen, right? It's just when you're constantly reacting to situations, it's hard to act with strategic intent, right?
Right.
And to take a productivity mindset towards performance management, there needs to be strategic intent behind it, right? You need to have the ability to work on things before they become a critical problem that needs to be addressed or reacted to. So I see this face of HR very closely aligning with the control mentality out of that reactive mindset of, well, we need to, as much as possible, control how many fires we are putting out at a time. So when something comes up, we respond, we institute a performance improvement plan and give them a time frame. And if they don't adhere to it, then we move on to discipline or termination procedures.
Yeah. Well, and one thing that's really kind of a sad side effect of a HR department or people with HR responsibilities that are used to just constantly being in talent attraction or talent recruitment mode is they will be like, well, if this person doesn't show us they're worth keeping them, we'll just replace them because we're pretty good at filling seats.
Yeah.
And there's no concept of the retention piece. Is either you need to because they're so behind the eight ball and they're so focused on just recruitment that it's like if the person doesn't show up and is problem free, then they're out because we don't have the bandwidth to help you become good at your job. So you have to come fully formed and problem free. Otherwise, we're just going to replace you because that's all we have capacity to do. And man, I've seen that in so many, I've heard stories, especially from like younger employees and stuff like that that have gotten these jobs. They're great. They don't hear anything super concerning. They're looking forward to their probationary period, and they are just let go at the end of the probationary period with very little warning because they just didn't quite become problem free enough. They did, and to that it was just easier to replace them to the HR team, and that's sad.
It is. And I think it's important to clearly state and reinforce that this is not only an HR problem, right? Performance management is not only an HR problem.
Yeah.
It's a management problem and a deficit of management skills. While HR holds the overall responsibility for the performance management process, let's be real. It's the individual managers who should be monitoring, who should be using the performance management frameworks to support their staff to improve performance. Unfortunately, when that doesn't happen, it just falls back and creates more work for HR professionals.
Well, and let's be serious too. When HR stands for the highly reactive department, it's not just the HR professionals that are in reaction mode all the time. Tends to be an organizational wide thing. And sometimes, and we've seen this with some companies where, sometimes our first engagement with them tends to be with the HR people just because it's kind of how we get brought in. But then we kind of see that HR's in a constantly reactive mode and managers are in constantly reactive mode and employees are constantly reactive mode and senior leadership is. So it becomes an organizational wide thing. So when when I say an employee is not, when they bring a new employee on and the manager doesn't have time to correct the employee performance because they're putting out fires constantly. So they kind of kick the problem to HR, and HR is like, well, either do you want to just replace them because that's all we have capacity to do? And then that's usually how it happens. It's not someone intentionally going, let's just, let's do this with, as a plan. It's just people trying to keep their head above water. No one has time to get ahead. You're right. They're often not trained enough how to actually improve a new employee's performance or employees whose performance is dipped and is struggling. So and they don't have the capacity or the bandwidth to be trained, and HR doesn't have the capacity to kind of put in some or proactive stuff. All this to say that usually the highly reactive problems don't just live within HR. HR is often reflective of it, but it's almost like a lot of the reactive momentum gets built up in other departments and then ends up almost like being pushed into HR. And HR is often more in a reactive mode because everyone else's reactive problems are now their problems, which kind of increases the problem tenfold.
Yeah, and that's often where this mindset comes from, is a lack of strategic intent and operational thought throughout the organization, which forces HR to react to situations because nobody in the organization is actually taking a strategic mindset in what they're doing.
Yeah. So then the question of what can be done to improve employee performance in a highly reactive department, it's a tough situation because you're struggling to keep your head above water. And so what we would say is that any type of ability to work with the management team to build some level of proactive employee support to improve performance, to give people more opportunity and to have structure, have clear expectations, so that way the employee performance can actually be improved and not be a either you're perfect or you're gone kind of, either or kind of situation. Anything that you can do to allow employees to actually, have the chance to actually improve with some kind of clarity and support and clear expectations is really it's gonna serve you very, very well. I know it's a tough thing to say, just you have to do more work in order to answer it when you're in a highly reactive department.
What needs to be done is, you're right, there needs to be more intent around what happens right from the very top, from the senior leadership level. There needs to be Managers need to be provided training on how to actually manage performance, not just monitor or restrict or react to poor performance. And it may involve finding external resources to support you.
Yeah. Yeah. And we won't lie. That's something that tends to be kind of a catalyst for some of the work that we do is we need this to change. We don't have the bandwidth internally to change it. We have the desire and we have and we have the commitment to do it, but we just don't know where to start because we're just every day is just putting out fires. So sometimes just having someone else take that off your plate and guide you through the transformation is often the only
You need
kind
to
of
find capacity somewhere. So either it's going to come from picking up more work or offloading some parts to somebody else. And it's going to be up to you and your company to decide what's the best fit for that.
Yeah. But the one thing we always really try and make clear is that the cost savings of moving from a highly reactive department towards something with more strategic intent is substantial.
To the next one. So if the third phase of HR is when HR stands for hovering and restricting. And this one, as you can probably guess just from the name, is very control based, right? It's the idea that HR is Big Brother, is always looking for when things are going wrong and provide corrective action. In and of itself, not a bad thing, but when that is the focus of HR in your organization, it creates a lot of challenges. And again, it tends to be very much a HR is the bad guy. HR, it's the toxic side of HR, or the HR is not your friend mentality. Don't share or say anything to HR because they're just going to use it against you. These sentiments that we hear very frequently from employees. If you've spent any time talking to employees, you may have heard these. This mindset is, again, quite prevalent. And it tends to view performance management as a mechanism for restricting what employees can do, rather than empowering them to do better.
Yes, and one thing that is probably worth just quickly mentioning too is that when organizations try to evolve from a highly reactive department without increasing capacity and without getting external support or without trying to get proactive, they tend to get more restrictive. They tend to make harsher, more punitive rulings. They tend to focus more on suppressing people because as a way of just trying to keep their head above water.
As a way of suppressing the number of fires that they need to react to.
Yeah.
Right. It is, I want to use the language of it's a logical progression. But it's not really a logical thought pattern.
No, it's an unfortunate progression. And
it's often an easy progression to fall into.
Yes. Yeah. So it can be what happens when you're highly reactive and you're not too sure how to get out of it. We'll just squeeze everyone tighter. That tends to be where you move into. And again, another way to kind of think about this too is just the idea of, like I say, it's Big Brother. So Big Brother is trying to, use performance management as a way to, again, maintain the suppression, maintain the restriction. It is about, like, you cross this line, we're going to put you on this passive aggressive PIP so that way that you don't think we're the bad guys, even though we are, tinting our fingers in the background. That's kind of some of the way that people feel about about this. And often where we see this negative idea around PIP tends to kind of come from this hovering and restricting focus of HR.
This is a natural evolution of the other two, like you said, with the reactive mentality. But also, if you are shifting your HR from merely holding red tape without that strategic intent of what HR can be, this idea of we're going to bring in more HR support to monitor, to correct actions, to kind of restrict what people can and can't do. It is an evolution of both the holding red tape and the highly reactive models.
You're right. And so like and sometimes it's when the holding red tape department is in an organization that views employees as expenses and liabilities, and that the way that they see kind of the human resources is using humans as resources.
Yeah.
And that more commodity type relationship that they have with the employer, then they kind of can jump right from holding red tape to hovering and restricting. If they're like, well, employees are liabilities, we have to manage them, we have to suppress them, we have to restrict them because they're a cost center, they're liabilities and expenses, so we have to mitigate that risk. So going back to the question, what can be done to improve employee performance in the hovering and restricting department? I don't know if I got an answer for that one.
Well, it's a mindset shift. It is a struggle because when the intent of your department is to hover and restrict, you use control tools to do that, right? It's a natural outcome, or it's embodied in the very way that we view HR in our organization. So to change that, we need to change how HR is viewed in our organization, right? Because this hovering and restricting model is entirely about control. Whether that stems from a fear of employees taking advantage of us, whether that comes from a lack of understanding of what of how employees can be treated as an asset rather than a liability, can really enhance our entire business model. If you are in the hovering and restricting mentality, you probably are not going to approach performance management as a productivity tool because it's about control. So how do you do it better in that situation, in that mentality, is that you need to change, you need to shift the mindset and what HR means in that organization away from focusing on restricting actions to empowering performance.
There is no trust between employees and management and employees and HR in the hovering and restricting environment. There's just not. So employee performance is going to be about how do I stay out of trouble and how do I keep off the radar of HR and my manager is a survival mode. And you cannot improve performance, in that kind of environment, in any kind of sustainable way. It's something that it's just, you're always going to struggle with employee performance because employees are only going to give you enough to stay out of trouble because they don't trust you. They are probably looking for a new job right now and
keeping their heads down to collect a paycheck.
Exactly. So the priorities are not aligned to improve employee performance. So let's move on to the last one, which is the fourth face of HR is what we would call the humans required department. And this is basically the polar opposite of the hovering and restricting department. This is where the organization values human capital. HR is more the employee advocate. They're about seeing employees as assets. They're about providing resources to humans. And it really is about that idea of, we get that you are a person who we need to nurture and support to if we want you to achieve great heights. So we're behind you and we're going to help you do that. And if you work in this kind of department or organization, you are lucky because you are not in the majority. but there's a lot that can be done to improve performance in this organization.
Yeah, this idea of humans required really exemplifies that from a business perspective, we understand that if we treat people well, they will perform better. If we treat people like human beings, we empower them to do their job, we trust them within the authority of the position that they have, we invest in them because as they get better at what they do, that will make all of us better at achieving our organizational outcomes. It is the mentality that we personally push in through all of our work when we're working with clients. It's all about shifting the mindset to this idea that if we can focus on improving the employee experience, then that will have a direct impact on our organizational outcomes. It will improve productivity, it will improve performance, it will improve retention rates, it will help us attract talent to our organization, and it will increase our profitability. It will increase our market share. It will increase our ability to innovate and pivot as new situations arise, right? It has a direct impact on your bottom line, but it requires a lot of work and effort.
Absolutely. So when we talk about what can be done to improve employee performance when you have a humans required department, well, I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to drop a little bit of psychology on people just to kind of help it kind of accentuate the depths of what can be done when you have the benefit of a human required department. So there is a concept called the Pygmalion effect. And it's psychological bias where higher expectations can lead to higher performance. Or on the other end, lower expectations can lead to lower performance. It's basically the idea of a self-fulfilling prophecy between what you expect of people and what they will provide you. Now, what's interesting about the Pygmalion effect is that it requires that the kind of sincere expectation. So it's a matter of saying that, you know, if you have a if you have a boss who says, "Hey, I'm excited for you to take on this new project. I want, you know, so you have my support. You let me know what you need. I know you're going to achieve great things." And that boss walks the walk on that. And then you're like, "Wow, they really believe in me. Well, I'm going to try a little bit harder. I'm going to, you know, I'll take them up when I need the help. Like, you know, they're putting a lot of faith in me, so I'm going to meet that faith." That, you know, then what that creates is, you know, a great situation where your behaviors are aligned and you put more effort into it and you achieve greater things than if your boss said, "Hey, here's a project, just do your best."
Right.
It's about setting the bar, but then supporting that bar being met. And it's a pretty interesting concept in a way that it's also a bit of an obvious concept. But it's surprising that there is real science and real kind of cause and effect relationship behind the self-fulfilling prophecy of the Pygmalion effect, because it really does work. If you create high expectations and support those high expectations, you're going to achieve a higher outcome. And this is an idea that's a lot easier to understand in the humans required department than it would be in the other three types of HR departments.
Yeah, and what was interesting for me when you first introduced the concept of the Pygmalion effect to me is that it sounds like just common sense, right? If you set high expectations for people and support them to achieve it, they will rise to the occasion. If you set low expectations for people and you don't give them any support, they will lower their performance to meet your expectations.
Mhm.
Knowing that it's an actual psychological effect or theory or whatever you called it is interesting, because if it is rooted in psychology, then it makes it a bit more tangible. If it's a bit more tangible, then it's something that we can manipulate. Not manipulate in a negative sense, but understanding that there's actual psychology behind it allows us to use this or deploy it within what we do around performance management.
What's interesting is that by knowing it's a real thing, it's not so much that you can manipulate, it's that you can replicate it.
Right. Yeah.
That you can rely on it. It's that it's something that will work again and again and again. It's not just a one-off, hey, in just this one rare situation, it just happened to work coincidentally. It's there's some consistency behind it because this is how human brains work. So, and
What's
again,
interesting is that all of the best performance management programs that we've designed and that we've reviewed all inherently do this,
mhm,
right?
absolutely, yeah.
They set the expectations. They set high expectations for people, right?
Mhm.
But right from the very beginning, people know how they're going to be evaluated in their role. They know what success looks like. There's regular check-ins to ensure that they are on track to meet their performance metrics. They are supported with what they need to either get back on track or to continue to meet their expectations. And we see this time and time again when this type of uh, productivity focused performance management framework is being utilized. People will regularly rise to the occasion and meet the expectations that we set. We can set high expectations. We can expect a lot out of people, but we have an obligation to support them to achieve those outcomes.
And that's the key right there, because I'm sure when I first explained it, someone's like, okay, guys, I don't believe you. I've had bosses that have just set this crazy, ridiculous bar, and I wasn't any more motivated to achieve it. I wasn't able to reach that bar, and I end up failing. And if that was you, I apologize. That's an awful situation to be in, but that's not what we're talking about. The Pygmalion effect requires that the conditions that you work in are supporting that performance and expectation, that you're being properly utilized and being given the opportunity to achieve it. And there's a bit of a practical use of the skills that you have, and that you're being set up in a situation to be successful, and that you're given feedback and encouragement and redirecting and realignment when required. And if those three things don't exist, then you're not being given high expectations with support. You're being set up to fail.
Hmm.
And that's something that is a big difference. But you're right. The Pygmalion effect is more talked about with high expectations and higher performance, but it's actually a neutral idea, that it's about people rise to the expectations and support that you give them. It's probably a better way to define it in a more neutral way. A great story that kind of summarizes that is when I was working in an organization. This was fairly early in my career. I worked in a satellite office for this large organization, and there was an employee who worked in the organization with me who had a job, and I don't know what she did, because man, she didn't do a whole lot. And her boss was this kind of like, whatever, do stuff, don't do stuff, like laid back to the point of like really ineffective. And so I never really knew what this person did. This person was in this job for like a year or two, and these were contract jobs that had to be renewed by had to be renewed on an annual basis. And at one point, the position that this woman was in was going to be discontinued because of how ineffective she was. And what happened was her boss ended up getting fired because of his lack of ability to manage, and her project being, unrenewed was one of the many straws that broke the camel's back, in a sense. A new manager came in and said, okay, so I've got a year of this project left and it's already been canceled. So I'm going to bring somebody in who, let's see what they can do with this job, because there's no real floor on this job, because the position's already been seen as a failure. So whoever I bring in is going to kind of have free reign to do something cool, because they got to burn off the rest of this contract, and let's see what can happen. And what's interesting is the person that this new manager who wanted to prove herself in the position brought in you, James.
This guy. Yeah. It's funny that you're telling my story. Yeah, so I guess to kind of clarify a few things. Early in my career, yeah, Kobe and I, we worked together for the same organization. And I was brought in I was told right from the beginning, you've got 9 months left in this contract. The contract's already slated to be, the funding has already been pulled. So basically you've got a 9-month contract position and then you're done. My manager in that time, I've talked about this person in a few different times in our podcast and in our work, because this person is still one of my favorite human beings, because the way that she managed my performance and supported me to do cool things really elevated my career trajectory. So yeah, we had 9 months to do whatever we want. Funders didn't really care because the performance on that program was already so low for the previous like 3 or 5 years that they were riding out the contract. What was cool was working with my manager and her having the faith in my ability to just come to me with something cool that you want to do. We still need to hit the broad outcomes, but the method that we use to get there can be completely different. It allowed me to research and design a new way of doing business development through this organization to support businesses with their recruitment and attraction efforts. And what's kind of amazing is that in the first 6 months of that 9-month dead contract, we were able to produce enough results that the funding got extended. We went from a 9-month dead contract to within 6 months it being renewed for another year. Within another 6 months of that, so 3 months into the newly renewed contract, we were producing such results that we were actually able to wrap that into core funding. Eventually, that program that I designed became a provincial standard for employer engagement programs through these types of agencies.
Yeah. So what's really great about, well, one, it's just kind of a cool story of how you turned a absolutely dead job.
I'm always happy to talk about myself.
Yes. But it is very impressive that you turned an absolutely dead job that everyone had written off and moved away from it to the new provincial standard in how to provide that type of support to businesses. So that's just a cool thing. I'm going to give you applause on that. But it is also a great story that exemplifies both sides of the Pygmalion effect. Your predecessor and her boss were a great example of, if you set low standards and you don't create the conditions that support high productivity, you don't utilize people effectively, and you don't provide good feedback, they will meet that poor expectation with poor results. Versus when your boss came in and hired you, she set high expectations for you to achieve something. She gave you the conditions and the support to do that. She properly utilized your skill sets and gave you the feedback and the course corrections you needed in order to achieve high performance. And you even blew her expectations out of the water. And that is what can happen with a mindset shift and by leveraging the Pygmalion effect. You can resurrect the dead in a sense. But okay.
Let's walk back from that statement.
Yeah, maybe, yeah. Maybe we'll cut that out in editing. but honestly, but you can achieve great things by this idea. And what's so funny is you're like, well, when I first explained this to you, you're like, well, isn't that common? Shouldn't that be common sense? And I'm like, yeah, but it's not. But it is something that is not common enough to be common sense.
Yeah.
So
this is just not common.
Exactly. So I think that one of the ways that we can kind of tee this up a little bit too is the way that we utilize this focus around conditions, utilization, and feedback is something that is built into how we rebuild performance management tools and programs. So a lot of the work that we do when we go into organizations are going to help them with their kind of talent transformations is trying to build some type of system that creates the kind of conditions similar to what you experienced early on in your career, but has been proven to improve portfolio performance, leveraging the Pygmalion effect. And a lot of the ways we talk about that is a really simple way. We talk about it in terms of rules that empower, creating the benchmarks and the goalposts and the expectations that let people kind of hit those high peaks that, again, leverage high expectations to turn into high performance. And I think we have a program where we talk about that. And maybe it's called the Autonomy Freeway. And maybe we can do an episode about that down the road because we're kind of running low on time now. But I would like for us to kind of just steer this Pygmalion effect, human required, rules that empower kind of, and talk about it in terms of the more common realities of remote teams and multiple location organizations.
Yeah, so a lot of our clients have multiple locations. So managing performance across multiple locations or managing performance with teams that are, whether they're multiple locations being others like satellite offices or they work from home, it doesn't really matter. What we tend to do, I used the language of guardrails earlier. So perform a really robust, excellent performance management system is going to very clearly set the expectations of here's what you're expected, here are what your responsibilities are, here's how we are going defining success in this role. And on one side, that becomes your guardrail. On the other side, it's here are the things that you can't do, right? Here are the, don't cross these lines, these boundaries, but your opportunity to do cool stuff rests in between those two guardrails of expectations, clear definitions of success, and rules that empower, setting the limits of as long as you're not doing X, Y, and Z, you're good to go. Right? That framework becomes very, very powerful motivational tool and performance management tool because you also need to temper that with regular check-ins, right? How are things going? We've set the expectations. We know how we're going to measure the success in your job. So if you're managing a remote team or people who work from home, you're probably going to want to do the check-ins a little more often, whether that's bi-weekly to see, okay, here's what we've stated is our metrics for success. How are you in achieving those? Okay, what do you need from me as your manager to make sure that you can achieve those goals? Bi-weekly basis, 15, 20-minute conversation, regular check-ins can make all the difference in the world if you have these guardrails in place that focus people's energies. Mm-hmm. It's just, again, it's one of those things that it makes sense and should be common, but it's not commonly applied. But we see this we not only see it, we have seen it in action with clients. We regularly see this in action, improving the way that managers are able to manage teams, whether that is multiple location, whether that is work from home, and really improve the overall performance of individuals, of teams, and of organizations when this mentality is taken and applied throughout a company.
Absolutely. And a lot of what is fundamental to making a lot of this stuff work is being prepared to manage people a little bit differently. Mm-hmm. This isn't your grandparents' way to manage people. This really is about what works in today's workforce climate. So we're going to do a really quick recap. I think this has been a good conversation. So what can be done to improve employee performance? Well, again, the big question is, how are you viewing performance management? Are you seeing it as a tool of control, or are you seeing it as a tool for productivity? That is kind of the foundation first thing you need to really be asking yourself when you're trying to increase employee performance. Because how we view employee relations and HR has a lot of impact on the way that we, again, utilize systems to manage employee performance. Are we trying to just hold people to a generic standard of checking boxes by having a holding red tape department? Are we just trying to put out fires and mitigate the problems because we have a highly reactive department? Are we trying to suppress people through a hovering and restricting department? Or do we actually have a humans required department that is about trying to achieve optimal performance and optimal productivity through investing in people and using people and providing resources to humans? We need to be more aware of looking into the Pygmalion effect and the impact that higher expectations can become a self-fulfilling prophecy towards higher performance if we have the conditions, utilization, and feedback to get them there. Ultimately, if you want to talk about improving employee performance when it comes to remote teams in multiple locations, we have to be prepared to manage differently. Look at rules that empower. Look at setting clear expectations. Set the guardrails that will help people kind of achieve what they want, what they need to in order to optimize performance. But we have to realize that a lot of this, if it sounds like a big change to you, then going through, seeing this as potential a transformative process might be the reality of it. And those things aren't necessarily quick, cheap, or easy. But if you want to actually do something about employee performance, they may be necessary. All right. So that about does it for us. For a full archive of the podcast and access to the video version hosted on our YouTube channel, visit roman3.ca/podcast. Thanks for joining us.
For more information on topics like these, don't forget to visit us at roman3.ca. Side effects of this podcast may include improved retention, high productivity, increased market share, employees breaking out in spontaneous dance, dry mouth, aversion to the sound of James's voice, desire to find a better podcast.